Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, and today we have one of the candidates for Supreme Court Justice, Jill Karofsky. Did I say that correctly?
Perfect.
All right. You actually have a website, it's Jill for Justice, and I know you are a judge currently, but do you mind if I refer to you first name?
No, go right ahead, please.
Very good. Judge, would you mind telling our viewers a little bit about yourself? I guess I should also introduce the fact that there is a Supreme Court election in early April. It'll be the same election in which the presidential primary is. And we also have then a primary because we have 3 candidates who have submitted nomination papers sufficient to force the primary. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep, there'll be a primary on February 18th, and the general election is going to be April 7th.
All right. Thank you for those specific dates. And Judge Jill is our first of 3 candidates that we are interviewing, and she's remote from her home in Madison, Wisconsin, where she is currently a judge at the circuit court level. So, again, Jill, if you don't mind telling the viewers a little bit about yourself and your background, maybe starting with a family or whatever, but I want to take the experience, probably chop that up into, because you've got a long list here of things that you've been involved in. So, all right?
All right. Yeah, well, thank you so much, and thank you for allowing me to interview via Zoom or Skype. I am a sitting judge right now in Dane County, and I have a very, very busy court calendar. I heard over 1,700 cases just last year, and so I appreciate the opportunity. I was in court today, so I wasn't able to make it up there. So thanks for the opportunity and thanks for understanding. Look, I'm running for the Wisconsin Supreme Court because we have got to get this court back on track. I have been traveling all around Wisconsin the past several months, and I hear the same thing from voters. What they see are justices who act like politicians. They make decisions before anyone ever walks into the state Supreme Court chamber. They don't follow the rule of law. And that feels like corruption to people. So what I'm bringing to this race are my experience, my Wisconsin values, and my energy. And you have asked about my experience. So I will tell you that I am the only person in this race who is or who has ever been a trial court judge. And that is hugely important because I'm in court every day. I see how the law impacts real people. I know how important it is to apply the law equally and fairly. And when we apply the Constitution, to do it with today in mind. It is 2020. I also know that, hold on. I have a golden retriever here, and I have to give her a treat or she's going to be barking at me, so I apologize.
That's all right.
I also know that when people come into my courtroom, they are dealing with real problems. It is not an esoteric exercise when people come in and they are a victim of crime, or their property is being divided in a divorce, or they are dealing with eviction issues. And when you're in the courtroom all the time, you see how that impacts people. I'm also the only person in this race who has spent years as a prosecutor. I know how important it is to treat everyone with the fairness and dignity and respect that I would want to be treated with. I understand the importance of individual rights when it comes to victims, when it comes to witnesses, when it comes to defendants, and when it comes to the public. I know how important it is to be smart on crime. I have experience as a civil attorney as well. I was the general counsel for a national organization where I practiced employment law and copyright law and managed huge, huge contracts. I've been a victim advocate. I was the state's first violence against women resource prosecutor, and then I was the head of the state's Office of Crime Victim Services. I worked in every single county of this state to make sure that victims' rights were honored, to make sure that victims had the help that they needed while their case was winding through the criminal justice system. And I've also been a law professor. I've been a professor at Wisconsin's only public law school, the University of Wisconsin Law School, where I taught trial advocacy, and I taught a class that I created on victims in the criminal justice system. So when people graduated from law school, they would know right away how to help people who oftentimes have little or no voice in our justice system. So I'm the candidate in this race who has been on the front lines of our justice system for almost 3 decades.
All right, let's back up a little bit. Your bio mentions that you have children. Are they in Wisconsin?
I do. I have 2 teenagers. I'm the single mom of 2 teenagers. My daughter right now is in Tucson, Arizona, where it's almost, I would say a good 80 degrees warmer than it is where we are here. And my son is a sophomore in high school.
Okay. And you also mentioned your golden retriever, and that's who viewers might hear in the background. But it was dinner time, and so you're down in the kitchen area, I suppose. In your home.
Am, yeah. So I do apologize for that. I have a 11-and-a-half-year-old, one-eyed golden retriever named Cleo, who at this time of day, for anyone who's a pet owner, knows that this is when they need the most attention.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, Mom just got home from work, so right.
Exactly.
Well, you mentioned your experience as a prosecutor, and before that, you got your master's degree and law degree from Madison. Is that correct? Is that right?
I did.
Okay.
Yes.
And then out of law school, where did you go?
Immediately after law school, I worked in the Dane County District Attorney's Office. I was an assistant district attorney, and then after a couple of years, I was promoted to deputy district attorney. And I handled cases, all kinds of different cases, but I really specialized in cases where women and children were victims of crime: sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, and child sexual assault.
Yes.
And I worked really hard to make sure that those victims had a voice in the system, and that the people who harmed them were held accountable for what.
How long were you in the Dane County DA's office?
Almost 10 years.
Okay. And then from there, is that when you went in to be the civil attorney for the national organization?
Yes, then I went to the National Conference of Bar Examiners, which is the organization that writes the bar exam, that makes sure that people who practice law all around the country are qualified, have the minimum competence to be able to practice law in whichever state they're practicing in.
Okay. And so you're a little younger than me, but can remember when the domestic abuse statute was first introduced and kind of tried to level the scales, so to speak, so that the victims had it more of a, speak about, a little bit more about your work as a victim advocate, please.
Sure. So I have been working with victims of crime since I was in law school. And I started out as an assistant when I was in the Dane County District Attorney's Office. Initially, I had a caseload that had a lot of domestic violence cases. Like you're talking about, I think one of the statutes you're talking about was Wisconsin's mandatory arrest law. Also, Wisconsin, of course, was the first state in the country to pass a Bill of Rights for victims. We've really been on the forefront when it's come to victims' rights in this state. So I worked with many victims of crime in the DA's office. I created a class at the University of Wisconsin Law School, as I mentioned, called Victims in the Criminal Justice System. Really proud about my work in that class. There are only 3 or 4 law schools in the entire country that have a class devoted only to crime victims. I also was the state's first violence against women resource prosecutor. I was an assistant attorney general at the Wisconsin Department of Justice. And in that role, I helped prosecutors all around the state learn how to prosecute cases of domestic violence, of sexual assault, and of stalking. And then I became the head of the Office of Crime Victim Services for the state, also at the Department of Justice. And in that role, we help victims in every county of Wisconsin get the services that they needed, the compensation that they needed through the Crime Victims Compensation Program, make sure that their rights were protected as they went through the criminal justice system, that they got the notice that they should have, that they were able to be at court, that their voices were heard, that they were treated with the fairness, the respect, and the dignity that all crime victims and everyone in the justice system should be treated with.
So thank you. That was an excellent summary. And so your experience is not just there in Dane County, even though that's where you've been judged for almost 3 years now. You really do have statewide exposure in those areas.
Absolutely. I traveled around the state every week when I was at the head of the Office of Crime Victim Services and when I was the Violence Against Women Resource Prosecutor. Helped many people throughout Wisconsin. We were responsible for grants that went to every county to make sure that people had the sexual assault services, victim services, for example, that they needed. Made sure that every county that had a rape crisis center, that they had the funds. Make sure that people had access when they were sexual assault victims to the sexual assault nurse examiner exam, or the forensic exam, as we now call it. We did a lot of work with victims, made sure that their privacy rights were protected. I worked on the Supreme Court rule. The reason that you don't see a victim's name ever anymore in a Court of Appeals decision or a Supreme Court decision was because of the work that I started to keep victims' names out of those decisions so we could protect their privacy.
Okay. Well, and this is more of a process or a procedural question, but how do you run then a statewide campaign as a sitting and active judge with the primary coming up in roughly 9 weeks?
Yeah, so you get around the state, you talk to as many people as you possibly can. I have, like I said, a very, very busy court calendar. I'm in court every morning at about 8 o'clock, and I don't get out until 4:30 or 5, and then I campaign in the evenings, and I campaign on the weekends. And one of the things that I'm bringing to this race is my energy. I was the state high school tennis champion in Wisconsin. I was a Division I athlete in track and in cross country. I finished the Ironman triathlon 2 times. I now run 50-mile ultra marathons. I ran a race just in August. I started in Belleville and ran south of Monroe back to Belleville. It was 50 miles. I did it in just over 11 hours. I have never been outworked, and I have never been out hustled. And there's just no way anyone's going to outwork or out hustle me in this race. Just to give you an example of one of our weekends, I took, after work on a Friday, I drove up all the way up to Ashland, late on a Friday night, slept very, very quickly, woke up on Saturday morning, ran the entire Whistle Stop Marathon, then went up to an event in Washburn, got up the next day, went to Merrill, went to Green Bay, got home at 9 o'clock, and I was on the bench the next morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, ready to go again. And so that's the kind of energy that I am bringing to this race, and the kind of energy that I'm going to bring to the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
That's awesome. It is a large state, and I didn't know that so you were at Whistle Stop this year?
Yeah. Have you run it?
I run the half. I've done the half for about 10 years there. So.
Oh, so you're up there this year?
Yes.
It was cold and windy.
It was very cold. It was very cold. But
yeah, I loved it. I've done that race before, and
it's beautiful.
I love it.
Yes. So, well, that's great. Now, talk about, you mentioned values. And again, talking about how, and good or bad, I think it is more bad for our judiciary. We want to hear folks being more nonpartisan, neutral, less partisanship, left, right, end of the spectrum type of thing. And Wisconsin has gotten a national reputation for money coming in from out of state and huge money coming into these races. What do you bring to the table to try and stop that, if you will, or bring it to an end, or change the focus from partisanship to one more about justice?
Right. So I have a couple of answers to that question. One is, what we need in this state is a really clear recusal rule. There needs to be a bright line, and that bright line needs to be a line that everyone is going to follow. And it is incumbent on the Supreme Court to pass a strong recusal rule, so that when money comes into these elections, that if money comes in above where that line is, that a justice will not, or a judge will not hear that case. And the recusal rule needs to go all the way through the court system, the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and into the Circuit Court. The problem is that our Supreme Court has failed to promulgate that rule. There is no rule. I would love to have a rule. I would follow that rule if we had it. I would follow it happily, because I'd be so happy that we have a rule. So that's the first thing. We've got to have a strong recusal rule. As far as the values that I'm bringing to this race, I am born and raised in Wisconsin. I'm bringing my strong Wisconsin values to this race. I was born and raised in South Central Wisconsin. When I grew up, my mom was mayor of my city as I was growing up. And I watched her do things like bring emergency medical service into my town. I saw her bring buses in so people had access to public transportation. I was so proud of my mom. The first time I walked into a courtroom, it was to change my middle name to hers. So I would have her name. My dad was a local pediatrician. And the first thing my dad did when he retired was open a free clinic for teenagers, because he knew that they wouldn't have access to health care unless there was an opportunity for them to get health care for free. So my parents taught me how important public service is, how important serving your community is, how you need to use whatever gifts you have to stand up and lean in when people around you are in need. And now I'm the head of my own house, right? I'm the single mom of 2 teenagers. My kids and I all went to public school. I talk to my kids about the importance of women's rights and workers' rights and human rights and civil rights. And when I talk to my kids about being in this race and ask them what they were concerned about, they are concerned about going to school for code red drills. They want to go to school to learn, not to do these code red drills that they have to do. They're worried about gun violence. My kids are worried about the climate crisis. My kids see corruption on the state level. They see corruption on the federal level. And they want the grown-ups in the room to do something about it. And it's the least that we can do for our kids is to stand up and to tackle these problems on their behalf. So those are the values that I am bringing to this race.
Very good. Now, you mentioned about the, corruption and about a recusal rule. Have you seen or heard of instances where maybe some of the people recently on the Supreme Court, I won't say currently, but recently on the Supreme Court, have heard cases that they probably should not have heard because of either campaign donations or other prior involvements?
Absolutely. I've seen it. And yes, I have absolutely seen it. And the public has seen it too. The voters see it too. They feel like there is corruption on our Supreme Court. And what really worries people and what should worry people is this, is think about the cases. Look, this race is so important. These elections have incredible consequences. Think about the cases that our Supreme Court is going to hear in the next several years. They most certainly are going to hear a case on redistricting, because we'll have a new census next year, and after that, the legislative lines will be redrawn, and there is, a very, very great likelihood that that is going to will evolve into a case that will end up at the Supreme Court.
And why is that? If I can stop you there on the redistricting, because that is pretty important. Why wasn't that solved with our last census and redistricting? Was there a passing of the buck there? Because I thought it went to the U.S. Supreme Court.
It did go up to the it did go up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and then they kicked it back to the, they kicked it back, and they said that there wasn't standing in each of the individual counties. And then at the very end of the last session in June of last year, the U.S. Supreme Court said if the districts that are drawn, if there's litigation on those because they are drawn on because of partisan lines, then we, the U.S. Supreme Court, aren't going to hear those. We want the state Supreme Court to hear those.
So that's why you're saying it'll be back in Wisconsin State Supreme Court.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so who's making the decisions about our legislative lines matters. I believe our Supreme Court is going to hear cases about how we're going to keep our air and our water clean, and who we have making those decisions matters. Our Supreme Court is going to hear cases about, probably criminal justice reform, about Wisconsin's answer to the climate crisis. What's democracy in this state going to look like? All of those huge issues that are going to impact Wisconsin today and for years into the future are decided by individuals on the state Supreme Court. And so who we have up there makes a huge, huge difference. And what voters feel like is that there are justices on the Supreme Court who don't follow the rule of law, who make decisions before anyone ever walks into the state Supreme Court chamber, who act like politicians. And that feels like corruption to people. And that worries people because they know how important who sits on our Supreme Court is. Not to mention that these terms are 10 years long. So once you are on the court, you are there for a very, very long time.
Okay. And Well, we've talked about your different, and you mentioned the energy thing, so we got in the marathon running and so forth. I wanted to talk a little bit about your awards. I know that it's not something that most judges tend to be a little bit more humble about doing that. They're not doing it for the sake of getting awards, but yours go back to a time before you were a judge too. So can you talk a little bit about the awards that you won from the Victim Witness Professional Association, the Sexual Assault Voices of Courage, and the Domestic Violence Award?
Sure. So I won award. I won the Professional of the Year award from the Wisconsin Victim Witness Association. I was very proud to earn that award after working years and years with the victim witness professionals around the state of Wisconsin, who I have to say are the unsung heroes of our criminal justice system. They help so many people every single day, and I was really honored to receive an award from a group of people who I hold in such incredibly high esteem. I also did win an award, the Voices of Courage Award from the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I won that award for the work I did on the Attorney General's Sexual Assault Response Team. And one of the things I did on that team was to identify the problem of untested sexual assault kits in Wisconsin, and then make sure that we got the resources that we needed to be able to test those kits so that crime victims could see justice. I won an award from a local in Dane County domestic violence organization, our community coordinated community response team here, for the work that I have done for decades when it's come to domestic violence, to try to keep victims of domestic violence safe, to keep women safe, to keep children safe, to keep people in need safe from violence in their own homes, which is the place where all of us should be the most safe. And when people end up being hurt in the sanctity of their own homes, that is, they don't have any place to go. So to make sure that they are helped in the criminal justice system is something that I spent much of my career doing.
All right, and we mentioned towards the beginning, and I'll repeat it, and probably will again, that you have a website. People need more information about you, your background. It's jillforjustice.com.
We do, yep, jillforjustice.com. We also have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page. We have Instagram, because my kids said you need an Instagram page. So we have an Instagram page as well with some wonderful pictures on it. And it would be great if people would join us in this campaign, and if they would get on those pages and they can see what this campaign is all about and learn more about it.
All right, but on that page, which I printed on the About Jill for Justice, is it goes on for 2 pages, the various task forces, coalitions, committees that you've been on, and not mentioning every board or council, but what are some of the ones that stand out with maybe you've had the greatest impact or the longest impact working on?
No, a lot of those boards I served on, each one of them is so special. I sat on the Wisconsin Child Death Review Task Force, which was a task force trying to figure out when we lose children in this state, why, and are there trends, and are there ways that we can educate people. I sat on the Wisconsin, the Children's Trust Fund board, which worked to try to figure out how we help kids who are abused and who are neglected in this state. As I mentioned, I did work on the Attorney General's Sexual Assault Response Team. I was one of the co-chairs of that team. I served on the Governor's Council Against Domestic Abuse, again, making sure that we had statewide policies to help domestic abuse victims. I also sat on the state's, the Crime Victims Council, which help crime victims all across the state. I've done lots and lots of work when it comes to the Violence Against Women Act. When I was the head of the Office of Crime Victim Services, one of the jobs I had was to oversee the Violence Against Women Act money that came into Wisconsin, to make sure that we could help as many people as possible with the money that we received. So in each of those, I was able to help people, women and children and people in need who truly needed the help. And I learned so much from the other people I served with on those committees, because they were all filled with people who had incredible expertise from around Wisconsin, and people who were really very, very devoted and committed to helping others.
I noticed too that you have had experience before you had your own children, that you were with Big Brothers and Big Sisters during a lot of the 90s, and as a program participant, and then later as a board member. Is that correct?
I did, and I just loved that. I had two little sisters, Tarita and Ashley, and I had so many fun outings with them. I feel like when you do a program like that, you get more out of it than you give. I was able to carve pumpkins again and go for hikes up in Devil's Lake with these wonderful young women and seeing the world through an 8 or a 9 or 10-year-old eyes is just awesome. Well,
and now they are women. Are they still in Wisconsin or Dane County and being able to help you maybe with your campaign?
I should get in touch with them and ask them. I'll let you know.
Yes. So, and then currently you became a judge, and somebody who I've served on the Governor's Judicial Selection Committee, but you did not go the appointed route, but you did go and run for an open seat. Is that how you won, or how did you become judge in Dane County?
Yes, I ran for an open seat. It was a pretty hotly contested race, and I won by 17 points. And I have been truly honored to serve in that role since my election. Okay.
And but any prior partisan experience before that, partisan politics?
So I grew up, like I said, my mom was a mayor of the town I grew up in. So I have been knocking on doors since I was 7 or 8 years old. Okay. And my mom, just like I'm doing right now, ran for a race where the election was in April. So you campaign all through the winter. So I'm pretty good at getting yard signs into the frozen tundra and getting all hand warmers and feet warmers, and I know which pens don't freeze. So I've been working on campaigns in one way or another for a long time.
All right, and that was the big difference, unlike Minnesota, and remember our county borders Minnesota up here, so more people are familiar with Minnesota procedures, but there the election is in November, so that judicial elections are right alongside the legislative and partisan elections. So your experience, you don't have necessarily November election experience seeking some type of partisan office.
Oh, me personally, no, I do not.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to clarify that. So, and you never ran for DA?
No, I did not. I was an assistant DA and a deputy DA, but I worked under the elected DA.
Okay, very good. And so, anyway, with lots of experience helping victims and witnesses, anything else that you would like to emphasize when it comes to whether it's your experience, your values, or your energy?
Look, I just think, like I started out saying, that we, the voters in this state, really want to have someone on their Supreme Court who is going to follow the rule of law, who is going to make decisions not based on the outcome that they want, but based on what the law dictates. And I have a long, long track record of doing just that. You can see that in the judicial decisions that I make every day. I have far more experience than either of my opponents when it comes to the court system. I have been involved, I have handled as a judge and as a prosecutor thousands more cases than the two of them combined. I have the broadest experience in this race. As a judge, as a prosecutor, my experience as working in the civil arena, and as a professor of law at the University of Wisconsin Law School. No one else in this race has the depth or the breadth of experience that I bring to it. So I have always been very committed to helping people in Wisconsin. Like I said, I was born and raised here, and my experience, coupled with the values that I have, coupled with the energy that I am bringing, makes me the best candidate and the most qualified candidate in this race.
All right, excellent. Well, with that, we'll end our time together. Refer folks once again, your website is?
JillForJustice.com.
And folks can go there to learn more. We'll have 2 other interviews. I want to wish you well for your primary election, and maybe we'll be seeing you on the ballot then come early April, all right?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us again on Western Wisconsin Journal.